And we're back with Season 2 of Star vs. the Forces of Evil. If you haven't watched the first video about Season 1, you should probably go do that because we're going to be building off it quite a bit. And once again, I'll put this disclaimer forth. This is not a critical takedown of the show. This is just a fun, creative exercise, or an outline for a fanfic I'm not writing, so please don't flip out if you like this show. I also like this show. We could totally hang out. Hit me up. Anyway, disclaimer done, time to get to the recap. In the first season, we gave Marco a character and a character arc. We established that Star's princess life was a bit boring instead of a constant crazy magical adventure, thus contrasting it to her newfound freedom on Earth. And we garnered some sympathy for her dealing with the pressures of her family legacy. So, what are the plot threads that we have to deal with this season? Well, let's make a list. We got Star dealing with her new wand and learning more about magic. Ludo has a training arc and then slowly loses his mind. We got some stuff with Tom, we got some stuff with Glossaric, Miss Haynes shows up a few times, we're properly introduced to Queen Moon and the entire Magical High Commission, a whole bunch of lore stuff, and a love triangle. Whew. That is a lot of stuff. Obviously, there's a lot more interesting things going on in this season, so unlike last season, the problem isn't really a lack of plot threads, but a lack of unification between them. There's also a lack of motivation for the main characters for most of the season. This lack of ongoing motivation is acceptable in the first season, because we're getting to know these characters and they're getting used to their new situations. But now that our characters are established and comfortable, it's time for things to start happening. So, while in the first season we were adding things in to fill all the empty space, in this season we're streamlining things and putting more focus on a few elements. So without further ado, let's start talking about that plot. I'm going to start off by editing a very minor detail, in this case to do with magic. After the events of the first season, Star's damaged wand is acting up, and occasionally casts evil green magic. This idea becomes problematic, however, because it seems that the corrupted magic is connected to Star's emotions. Except when it isn't, except when it is, except when it's not. As it switches from Star's emotions being the problem to just Toffee being the problem, and back again. Inconsistencies aside, the real problem here is that the whole connected to her emotions thing is dropped eventually and never really amounts to anything. She never has to, say, master her emotions at a critical moment or anything like that. The whole idea is just sort of thrown out the window in the finale. So here's what we're going to do. We remove the idea entirely and just have the green magic be a problem that slowly gets worse over the course of the season. Because, as we later learn, it's caused by Toffee slowly corrupting the world of magic. And by the end, it's so bad that Star becomes afraid to use the wand at all. Meanwhile, we can still have Ludo activate his wand with negative emotions. Maybe that's just how it works for him. That's fine. This is a minor point, I know, but I want to get it squared away so we can get onto the main stuff. So, the main stuff. As I said before, Season 2 has a whole lot of plates spinning. The problem is that most of them are only tangentially related to our main characters. So the first thing I want to do is get our main duo into the thick of things instead of just hanging around waiting for stuff to happen. It just so happens that Season 1 provided us with exactly what we need to motivate our characters. If you'll remember, Season 1 left us with quite a few mysteries and unanswered questions. For instance, who is Toffee? What exactly are his goals? His motivations? And how did he know so much about magic in the first place?
I can't. I don't even know how.
Yes, you do. It's the first spell your mother taught you.
The whispering spell.
Exactly.
This last detail in particular seems like something that would really stick with Star, seeing as it's not something many people would know about. It's certainly enough to make her curious about all of these questions. I imagine an episode early in the season, or maybe the Queen is visiting Earth to check up on Star. Maybe Star brings up these questions to her mother, who completely shuts her down and outright forbids her to look into it. Which of course makes Star even more curious. And afterward, maybe with a little prodding from Glossaric, Star decides to start looking for some answers on her own. And by on her own, I mean with Marco, because at this point they're pretty well established as a team. Using this framing device, we can tie a lot of plot points together very neatly. There's a lot of lore and backstory tidbits scattered throughout this season, So now, instead of them just sort of conveniently appearing every now and then, finding these bits of lore can be the result of a continued investigation by Star and Marco. We need to introduce new characters, like the Magical High Commission. So instead of them all conveniently appearing and introducing themselves for an episode, Star and Marco end up organically crossing paths with them on their search for answers. Their investigation can lead them on new adventures and have them face off against new dangers. Maybe Marco, the more organized and analytical of the team, gets his chance to shine, helping them follow clues as the team uncovers secrets about Toffee, Star's family, and the history of Mewni. We can bring back a bunch of the minor monster characters from Season 1, as they become key sources of information about Toffee, and of course we have Buffrog helping them along the way. All of this just so our main characters can have some semblance of a progressing narrative throughout the season. And most importantly, this is engaging for the audience, as the answers our characters are looking for are answers that the audience wants. But this doesn't mean they're going to be doing this for the entire season, because there's a turning point right in the middle, when Glossarit gets captured by Ludo. I call it a turning point because it's a perfect moment for the narrative to jump track slightly. In Season 1, we took Marco on a bit of a journey of self-discovery. This time, I want to do the same thing for Star. However, we don't quite have all the dominoes in place yet. So before continuing on the main plot, let's sidetrack a bit and talk about that love triangle. I'm gonna come right out and say that, as a whole, the romance subplot has got to be one of my least favorite things about the show. And hey, put those ship wars away, we aren't discussing that right now. We'll get to that. Anyway, I will say that if we just look at Season 2 and ignore the rest, it's not all that bad. And with a few changes, it can suit the story we're telling quite nicely. So Jackie, who's just recently taken notice of Marco after his character transformation, needs a few things before she can be an effective romantic rival for Star. First of all, she needs a personality. 'Cause, yeah, to start with, she's pretty much just skateboard girl who really likes the color aquamarine. Lucky for us, we can pretty much do to her what we did to Marco last time, using her place in the story to define her. In this case, it's generally good for a romantic rival to have something our main character is lacking in. For Star, we have an easy candidate. Responsibility. We should also have a new episode, one where Star and Jackie interact without Marco being there at all, so we can get to know this character without the romance being the core of the episode. Jackie is a pretty minor character in the show overall, and she has no reason to stick around for the following seasons. So on one hand, I see why they didn't really bother to give her much of a character, but she is important in that she's here to help Marco understand his own feelings, and to give Star somewhat of a character goal. So here's what we do. She's very similar to Star. Confident, determined, and fun, but more responsible. Give her a job or a duty of some kind. One that reflects Star's position as heir to the throne in some way. Something that she dedicates herself to, so we can show she has a life outside of hanging around with a skateboard or standing next to Marco. Flipping it around to Star's perspective, I think it would be better to have her realize she has a crush on Marco earlier on, but she doesn't act on it, deciding for the moment that Marco is better off with Jackie, because one day she'll have to leave him and go back to Mewni. This isn't the last we'll see of the love triangle arc, but for now, let's get back to the plot. As I mentioned before, I want Star to go on a personal journey this season, and as things are, she's got a lot of pressure on her. She's got the burden of one day becoming queen, and this burden is only made worse by her magic, which, as we established, is slowly deteriorating. And by this point, it's clear that Star has feelings for Marco, but for the moment she's decided that Marco is better off with Jackie. A seemingly mature decision, but one that leaves her feeling more alone than ever. Finally, losing Glossarit, followed by his apparent betrayal, is the final straw. Star gives up. She stops looking for answers about Toffee, and she stops using magic. Star has a habit of ignoring and running away from problems she'd rather not deal with, and at this point she decides it's all too much for her. She decides to give up on her responsibilities and try to live the life of a normal teenager. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Wait a minute, doesn't this mean Star's not going to be doing anything plot-related for the next few episodes? And wasn't that something we were trying to avoid 5 paragraphs ago? And sort of, yeah. While in the show, it's par for the course for Star to wait around for the plot to come to her, we've made our Star a bit more proactive, so I feel this sudden temporary change of pace is acceptable, especially if we spend that time with Star getting her confidence back. However, this does not change the fact that, yes, our main character isn't going to be doing much. But the fact that she is actively choosing not to be involved in upcoming plot events is very important to the story, as it later turns out to be a mistake. And while the events that follow are not directly her fault, we make it clear that they could have been prevented if Star had decided to take action. And this is how Star learns her lesson about responsibility. She chooses to do nothing, and this has consequences, not just for her, but for everyone. And this is a lesson she takes with her not just into the finale, but to the following seasons as well, making this a very, very important moment for her character. This, of course, leads us directly into the finale, along with the Battle for Mewni episodes. But before we dive into that, we have a few more details to clean up. Let's get Ludo out of the way first, because he's the easiest. Throughout this season, he has a narrative that is sort of running parallel to Star's, and it works pretty well. He gets his wand, and slowly gains more power while going insane, and eventually he falls under Toffee's influence. In the show, he's got more going on than pretty much any other character, despite only having like 6 episodes, so we can kinda just leave him as he is. Moving right along, we have the Queen. Queen Moon gets properly introduced in this season, and we get to see her relationship with Star in a lot more detail. Here is a fantastic few seconds from Season 2 that tells us so much about Star's relationship with her mother, and with barely any dialogue at all.
Call Mom.
Calling Mom.
That's it. That's basically all you need. Throughout the show, we see that the two have a lot of trouble understanding each other. Moon is just too busy being queen to really be a mother for Star, and that lack of influence is part of what led Star to become so irresponsible. In the finale, we learn about Moon's tragic backstory, and we can use it to give some context to her actions earlier in the season. In our version, she's constantly telling Star to stay put and not do anything. She doesn't want her involved because she wants Star to have the chance at childhood that she never had. This kind of helps us deal with the contradiction of Moon being very protective of Star, while also leaving her completely unsupervised in another dimension for 2 seasons. Now, we're going to talk about a character who's getting an upgrade in our version, Chairman Lekmet. In the show, Lekmet makes some funny noises, and then he dies. And then they go with the make us care about him after the fact method, which is a terrible idea, obviously. But instead of that, what if we cared about him before he died? What if, after Glossaric was taken, Chairman Lekmet became Star's replacement magic teacher? Speaking of Glossaric, let's talk about him so we can compare the two real quick. Glossaric, while introduced in Season 1, really starts to shine in Season 2. He's got his aloof attitude and suspicious secrecy, as well as his position as Star's mentor. Our Glossaric is going to be much the same, but perhaps even more aloof. Star bonds with him, but Glossaric is more interested in her magic skills than her personally. And as such, his sort of hands-off teaching her by having her teach herself method may be the best thing for her magical development, but it may not be the best thing for Star emotionally.
Look, Star, maybe there's something wrong with you. You ever think about that?
And what's that supposed to mean?
I'm not 100% sure.
This is where Chairman Lekmet comes in. After Star has given up on magic entirely, he's a more comforting figure who helps her get her confidence back in the episodes leading up to the finale. Maybe he can even give her some advice about her romantic troubles. He has a voice actor now, by the way. We're giving him a voice, obviously. He may not be able to help Star master her inner magic, like Glossaric eventually does, but he does help her get out of her slump. Really gives Star a shoulder to lean on before he dies horribly. Yeah, I know it's pretty sad, but character deaths are supposed to be sad, and not just, the goat man died. Bummer. As for the rest of the Magical High Commission, well, they are somewhat important characters, but not so impactful in this season that we need to go in depth with them right now. All they really do is get introduced and then job to Toffee. Which is why, for the sake of flow, I've made an addendum to this video covering the Magical High Commission separately. And with that, we're ready to get back to the main plot. again. Alright, let's speed through this season finale so we can talk about the Battle for Mewni arc. The MHC go to rescue Glossaric, get tricked and defeated by Toffee, so Moon comes back and tells Star that they have to return to Mewni. And in a way, this has been a moment long coming. Since the beginning, she knew the day would come when she would have to leave her Earth life behind and go back to being a princess. It was an inevitability, but it's still a bit sad. So before she leaves, she runs downstairs and confesses her feelings to Marco, then disappears, returning home, leaving everything behind. Fantastic. It all fits just right and gets those feels going. But we're adding one tiny extra detail right at the very end. Right after Star leaves, we just have Marco. He's shocked for a moment. Then, with a look of determination in his eyes, he pulls out his scissors and opens a portal, following Star to Mewni. And just like that, the love triangle arc is over. No, it's done. It's over. This is the final moment. Marco looks at the life he now has, one where he's popular enough to have a party at his house, one where the girl of his dreams likes him back, one where he's become sure of his place in the world. He takes a moment to consider all that, then leaves it all behind to follow after Star, knowing he might not come back. He chooses Star. Later, when they're reunited, they have a little moment together, and Marco's like, "Oh, you left so fast, I didn't have a chance to tell you how I feel." Or something else cheesy like that. You get the idea. And that's it. It's over. Remember how earlier I said the love triangle was my least favorite part of the show? Well, it's because it drags itself out over 2 more entire seasons for no good reason. This moment right here, at the very end of the show, this could have made me feel something if this had happened 2 seasons ago instead of 2 episodes ago. And no, this isn't about shipping. By the 4th season, I was begging for literally any ship to happen, just so we could get on with it. And so, this is it. They spent the 1st season becoming friends, and the 2nd season falling in love, and now it's over. From this point on, they are a couple, and we can spend the 3rd season dealing with that. Sound good? Okay. Let's finish this video, I guess. Jesus Christ, okay. So, the Battle for Mewni arc. These episodes are pretty good. Really good, in fact. Except for these 2 episodes. These episodes are really bad. And the problem is Marco. You see, in the show, Marco could have stayed home, and nothing would have changed. Literally every single thing he does is undone immediately. It's so consistent and obvious that for a while I suspected the writers did it on purpose. He literally does nothing for the entire arc. He's just there because he's gotta be there, I guess. But not for us. I want to have Marco actually do something. So obviously we're cutting out the first part where he's like moping about Star being gone because he could just go, which he does later anyway, so why was he moping? And we're going to open his episode with him showing up to the castle while it's already under siege by Ludo and his rat army. He tries to help fight them back, but it's no use, and River and his knights help Marco escape so that he can find Star and Moon. Now, technically, he still hasn't really done anything. The castle would have been taken over whether he was there or not, so he only serves us in a meta-narrative sense that now we get to see things happen through him. So instead of his next episode, where he literally runs around for an entire 10 minutes and manages to accomplish nothing, we have him meet up with Star at Buffrog's house. They have their little emotional reunion as mentioned before, and then it's his report of what's been happening at the castle that shocks everyone and finally convinces Moon that they need to take action. So they make a plan for the 4 of them to break into the castle and rescue the king and his knights. Seeing as River being thrown into the sky never really amounted to anything anyway, might as well just not even have it. But little does Moon know that Star and Marco have secretly planned to confront Ludo on their own. So during the rescue mission, they break away, so Marco can fight off the bird and spider while Star goes after Ludo. She can't win because Ludo's got his magic and she's been depowered, but she does manage to convince him about Toffee. So now this whole thing happens and we're back on track. Star has her moment and rebuilds the magic universe, and we get our Eclipse teaser, and then it's over. We're done with Season 2. This video was supposed to be shorter than the first one, but nevertheless, we've made it to the end of Season 2, so let's look back on what we had to show for it. One of the things I wanted to do was have Seasons 1 and 2 counter each other thematically. Season 1 was all about the value of individuality, and Season 2 about the importance of responsibility. Two messages that can seem contradictory at times, but they are both very important. And I don't think this is just my invention. These themes are already present in the show, they're just sort of weak. But it's these ideas that really got me interested in the show on a deeper level, because there aren't many shows that tackle these particular issues in this particular way. I feel like the show reaches for this ideal, but just falls short. And what riled me into making these videos is watching a show that could have been really great, but instead came out as pretty mediocre. And this doesn't really change with the next two seasons. The show never really rises any farther above what it does in the first two seasons. It just sort of plateaus from here on out. Which is why I'm not exactly sure how these videos are going to work moving forward. Up until this point, these videos have stuck pretty close to the plot of the show, only making minor adjustments. But all of these small changes add up over time, and if I'm going to continue onto the third and fourth season, we're going to be jumping way off track and heading straight into fanfiction land. Because it's at this point that I sorta got bored and started imagining an entirely different show. With not just changes to the characters and scenarios, but to the lore, plot, and overall themes of the show as well. Which is why I'm asking you, dear viewer, if that sounds interesting to you. Let me know in the comments if that's something you want to see. Depending on the response, well, I'll probably still make the video how I want to make it, but some feedback would be useful in helping me figure out how to present it. Anyway, thank you all for watching, and, as always, have a nice day.